Awesome. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, we're super excited to start our food and agriculture panel with our talented speakers on the right side. So why don't we actually go around for just briefly about random introductions of yourselves, but really what got you into working in the food and agriculture sector today?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabe Tavas, pronouns he, him. I'm the co-founder and CEO of an early-stage biomaterials company called Symmetry Wood that is basically making a brand new kind of wood completely from food waste. We intend to use this wood to replace especially endangered tropical hardwoods that incentivize a lot of destruction in rainforests across the world. So I come at this topic of food waste from a more like startup, tech perspective. I've been working on perfecting this material effectively for the last 8 years, starting from my early research in the University of Illinois. And I'm now working with my small team to scale up production here in Los Angeles. The food waste we work with the most right now is actually the kombucha brewery waste. Some of you might recognize photos of SCOBY, this slimy, globby stuff. It's uniquely well suited to produce a high-performance material, and we're now working with groups like guitar manufacturing companies to co-develop it and launch it into the market. So there's a lot going on. I've only been in LA for a little over a year, and I'm excited to connect with a lot of you and the rest of the whole food and the ag space. So with that, I'll hand it off to this lovely group of people here.
Hello, everyone. I am Francesca. I am the agency relations manager at Food Forward. Food Forward is a nonprofit based in Los Angeles that does food rescue of surplus produce. It is always 100% fresh produce of fruit and vegetables, and it's always 100% free to the end recipient. We do this in kind of 3 tiers where we recover physically from harvesting trees and gleaning farmers markets on a weekly basis, and then also working through surplus produce and donations from the LA wholesale market with our warehouse in Bell, California. So there's a lot of work that we do. The fact that we work 3 food recovery programs means that there's a lot of back end, but the core of this work is to recover the food so that there's no waste and then get that to people as quickly as we can so that they have the most time with it, as the end recipient. I came into this work from an entirely environmental perspective. It is 2-pronged in nature, where you can kind of see it as like, oh my God, we're doing really good work for the planet. But then also there's that humanity perspective of we're doing really good work for communities and people. We're getting nutritionally dense produce into their communities on a regular basis. We're supporting third spaces where they can know that they can go to these food distributions, these pantries, these organizations that have other wraparound services on a weekly, a monthly basis and get the support that they need, because people need a lot of support these days, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And that's kind of how food and agriculture play into this. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Very good. Hi, everybody. My name is Navin. I am a recent college grad and now co-founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Food for Thought. We are an impact advisory platform for building more resilient food systems. So when we say resilient food systems, we mean food systems that are less resource intensive, so use less land, water, and other resources, and that also are able to feed people more efficiently and also more affordably. So I got into this work my journey started when I was 12 and I was diagnosed with an autoimmune illness. And I really had to learn how to navigate the food choices that I had and how those affected my biology. And it wasn't until I started to realize how much goes into food and, chemicals and the amount of pesticides and all these things where I really was like, wow, the food system has a lot of problems in it. And I really started looking into what's being done about it. And I realized that there's a lot of levers in the food system, that there's not a lot of work really being done or visibility to those issues. So that's when I decided that I wanted to study that in college. And I originally started off as a pre-medical student, but then I kind of realized through my learning that that wasn't the type of impact I wanted to create on the world. So I actually, took a gap year to figure myself out. I started doing more nonprofit food consulting work, working at different agencies on food security work and then also food justice work. And I really found a passion in that work. So that kind of just led me to decide that I wanted to build something for myself where I was able to carry on that work in a meaningful way.
Wonderful. Wow. Hi, everyone. What a beautiful audience. I am Emmy Scott, pronouns she, they. I am 26 years old, and I'm the executive director of a global nonprofit that is 34 years old called Earth Guardians. We do youth leadership development for climate justice solutions. And so while I'm not directly in the food and ag space, food and ag is what brought me into the movement and something that our young people under the age of 30 that we serve are really championing right now. So my journey into the climate movement in general actually started with somebody who is in this audience today. He's hiding back there in the second row, my grandpa, my wonderful papa. Yes, he got to join me today, and it's so serendipitous because while he's not necessarily an environmental activist himself, he was definitely not like an environmental scientist by any means or anything like that. He taught me the joy of discovery and how to be able to have the willpower to learn. And so when I became 16 and I started learning about the food systems, when I turned 16, watched a documentary made by, I think, like Chipotle or something like that. And it was about the meat packaging industry. And when I was exposed to that, my whole world really opened up to the sadness and the tragedy that I was feeling, like realizing how impacted we were as people and then how impacted our environment was. But then also I was excited by the opportunity because of this love of discovery that my grandpa embedded in me. I was so eager to learn more about what I could do in my role and my part in the movement. And so that led me to Earth Guardians. When I turned 17, I ended up going to the University of Northern Colorado. And there I led a chapter crew, which is our flagship program at Earth Guardians, where we give young people under the age of 30 resources to be able to lead climate justice solutions. So I was reading a chapter when I was 17, and Earth Guardians really helped me find my community, my home. Honestly, Earth Guardians saved my life in so many ways when I was in college because I went out, I was on my own in Colorado, born and raised in Phoenix, so I didn't have any family when I went out there. Again, learning about the climate crisis, as I'm sure we've all felt the anxiety and the fear that can come from learning about what's going on. And so Earth Guardians really helped me find my community as well as the way for me to contribute. And so, yeah, that's what led me into this movement. And food and ag was a really big part of that because as who here in this audience loves to eat? Yeah? Who also loves agency? Yeah, so you guys are all land stewards. And maybe you just need to build up your vessel to be able to have some more willpower to see yourself as land stewards and really get your hands in some dirt. So I'm really appreciative of being here today and can't wait to talk more.
No, I love everyone that you all said because I think there's like a passion to like pursue food through different fields of study, and like myself too, like did environmental science and then minored in food systems, and was like, I just love how diverse our food careers are today. And, you know, I think this question's for Francesca. Like when you think about, you know, food recovery in your organization, a lot of people may not realize that there's a lot of opportunities in organizations that do this work, whether that's partnerships, development, logistics, education. Like, can you share more about what kind of roles make food forwards work possible, but also how people might see themselves applying the skills that they've learned or in undergrad or transitioning into working with different organizations?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's so many pathways that you can enter the work of food recovery and hunger relief. I neglected to talk about myself in the first round a little bit, so a little bit about me. I graduated from UC Riverside with a global studies degree and did international relationship building. At the start of my career, I would say the start of my career was mostly coming up through the conservation corps. So I worked doing trail work with the AmeriCorps in the San Bernardino National Forest. I served for 2 years in Peace Corps Panama doing environmental community-driven work and education. And then afterwards, when I came back, I was a crew supervisor for the LA Conservation Corps doing green job training. And then At that time, I was an essential worker, so I assisted in a lot of city-driven, like emergency food distributions. And that kind of sparked a little bit of interest in this getting food to people. And then seeing how that opens up on the environmental perspective as well. My next role was as a zero waste specialist at a Recycla franchise hauler in Northeast LA, where I did right size fitting, I did waste diversion strategies, I did SB 1383, like compliance and education. And so once I got into the meat of that, I was just like, wow, how do I get into the solution-based work of this? And that's how I found Food Forward. So I was able to be on the solution-oriented work of like, wow, they are recovering produce from so many different food streams. And I can see their impact. I've heard so much good work from them from living and working in LA for so long. I say this all because I think everyone that works at Food Forward had a different pathway that led them there. So there's the environmental perspective as me of being like, oh my God, methane emissions, let's get that food to people. And then there's a lot of people that came from like a health and wellness perspective of nutrition and getting nutritious, dense food into communities and seeing the impact that that has on health markers. There's a lot of people that came from food service industry. So we have a lot of wholesale experience in our warehouse for our wholesale recovery program. We have a lot of agricultural experience, and then we have like line cooks and people who worked in restaurants and saw waste firsthand, and we're like, I want to do something about that. I think there's a lot of roles in food recovery, and at the end of the day, Food Forward is a nonprofit. So there's like certain roles that you can always enter this role that are pretty evergreen. So if you love grant writing, if you love donor stewardship, if you love storytelling and getting the name and brand recognition out there so that we can get that funding and keep doing what we're doing, then there's work in development, there's work in communications, there's all this fundamental work that doesn't really come to like the top of your head when you think about food recovery. But they're literally who help make sure my salary gets paid and that I have health insurance and that we can do the work that we do every day and that we can expand our operations to do even more. So we've been growing consistently for every year. 100 million pounds recovered this past year. That was a huge record for us. I don't even know how many households that feeds, but I'm sure it's a lot. And so if any of this work is interesting to you, we do actually have some job opportunities open and a couple internships paid. We have a communications internship, we have a community programs internship, and we have an agency relations coordinator job open in my department. So I'm happy to discuss all the different entryways into food recovery, but it's mission-driven work. So if you have a passion for the work, I'm sure we can find something. Thank you.
Well, you heard Francesca. Please apply after this conversation.
Please.
And going towards, the development of community, right? Gabe, you really are facing this like huge industry of trying to redesign and, a new economy through the material that you're building. So my first question is more like, how you've been able to apply your skill sets and backgrounds, because what you're developing requires science, development, business, right, marketing, to make sure like how you're communicating it. Of what was the process like, but also how you made that material.
Yeah, it's definitely been a long road for sure, picking up all those things. It wasn't a straight line by any means. I can start off like pretty much at the beginning with this. 8 years ago, what really got me into this line of work was just before starting my studies in college. I was set to be industrial design student at the University of Illinois. I did a volunteer experience in rural Ecuador with an indigenous community high up in the mountains there, and I saw the literal impact of unsustainable materials in their environment, even in this relatively more remote part of the country. All the plastic garbage from oftentimes a lot of their food packaging had nowhere else to go but into kitchen and backyard fire pits. I was seeing my 7-year-old host brother at the time inhaling these fumes from the fires. I was feeling them myself, and I walked away from that experience feeling very determined to do something about that, to explore more sustainable materials. And so when I came back to university, I basically went on this quite independent streak where, I saw many of my professors were unfortunately still using those plastics and rare woods in some cases. And so I knew I needed to, go look online and read whatever I could to find these new biomaterials that are increasingly getting out there. I had seen people use the feedstock for our wood, bacterial cellulose, for various applications. I know Suzanne Lee, this amazing designer, made a whole leather jacket out of this. She had grown basically her own kombucha SCOBY pellicle in her bathtub and put it together and made it look amazing. And so that was a inspiring moment for me. My insight on it was, oh wow, people are making these great products, often like leather alternatives, but why not use this cellulose, like the cellulose in trees, to make a new kind of wood? So I had a little bit of a scientific mindset, even though I was a designer. That was actually something that I think helped me quite a bit. Even early on, I was going on my way to try and think in an interdisciplinary way. And I was fortunate enough to run into some folks in the university that just kind of nurtured that. I had professors who would lend me, used 3D printers or equipment to experiment with this bacterial cellulose. I started initially in my dorm room making very rough samples. I would be rather embarrassed to show them to you all now, but that's how it goes. You kind of just follow your curiosity quite intensely and just see where it goes. The other thing that I think helped quite a bit in that journey was I was sharing my work fairly openly on campus. I would go to some like pitch competitions or join clubs to get the work out there, try and get some team building going around this. And a lot of those people had their own strengths and their own mindsets and perspectives, and I was often learning from them. So sometimes business students were teaching me about how I could figure out the business model more effectively. I had, again, some professors who are like in the engineering realm who could give me tips here and there. So there is something to be said about just being very open about the kinds of conversations you have in your learning journey. Always be willing to ask good questions and humble yourself in that learning process, because you certainly won't know much in the beginning, and even when you are further along in that journey, there's still plenty more to learn. Always be a constant learner. So that remains true to this day. Even though it's been now 8 years, I'm still learning plenty of stuff. Now, in some cases firsthand, and then in other cases from some of the business mentors I run into at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator. That's where we're based, and they've been hugely helpful in our move to LA from the Midwest, and in helping us get a lot of our more refined production going here in Southern California. And we're just intent on scaling even further, because this is, I think, the best place for a business like ours to really flourish and have an impact in the food and ag space, and also with the protection of forests. That's the cool part. I get to kind of step into both of those environmental realms and try and address both problems simultaneously. So I'm happy to be of service and share whatever insights I can along the way.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And I think there's a lot of collaborations that is done. It's your friends, your mentors is really what helped you develop the business. It wasn't just you being I'm going to do this and it's only myself. It's you had to rely on different people to work together, which I, really appreciate that transparency. So my next question is for Navin, actually. Talking about the developments of food systems is right, we have this huge investment of climate, public health, consumer institutional change. And I kind of want to talk more about your specific platform of how it's really helping mobilize people to get into consulting, looking into consumer insights, and really how you helped amplify and helped, facilitate a lot of young people getting into these systems.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So in terms of my own background, I mentioned this a little bit, but I studied food systems. It wasn't actually a major. I graduated from Harvard in December, and I did like a custom major program, and I studied sustainable food systems, basically trying to figure out what are the political and economic systems that create the ways that we serve food, produce food, and consume food, and really thinking about like how do we redesign and architect a new system that can actually feed people better. So a lot of questions came up from that work, and one of the biggest things for me was like, what if you kind of peel back the curtain, like what actually goes on behind the scenes? Because I think a lot of us don't really know that. So for instance, like, you know, when I first learned what a distributor was, I was like, what is a food distributor? But then, you know, when someone's like, oh, Cisco, right? Like the Cisco trucks you see driving down the road all the time, like that's, you know, they are the backbone of the food system. There's these food service operators that, you know, are responsible for curating the menus and the production for so many different schools, hospitals, institutional food systems, and they have hundreds and hundreds of clients and serve millions and millions of meals. And there's not a lot of people who are tackling those behemoth institutions. So I think one of the things that we realized was that there's a lot of opportunity there and also a lot of work that needs to be done. So basically what we do now, and again, relatively new, but we have an advisory and consulting service, and we work across three main sectors. So we work across institutional food service. So that basically looks like universities and the food that food service operators serve to them. We also have some public procurement service, so we work specifically with like government offices and K through 12 schools and hospitals, and then we also have a career consulting service, which is more directed towards universities, which don't really understand how to place people into the careers in the food system, especially these what I call non-sexy careers, like, you know, doing procurement and inventory management, which are not necessarily fun all the time. At least for me, like a lot of my role is like looking at spreadsheets all the time and like doing a lot of math to try to calculate like how do you cut costs here, but then also like improve the, you know, sustainability goals. But it's really interesting when you're able to find like that thing that you're like, oh, this is like a really big, what we call low-hanging fruit sustainability intervention, where it's like this is something that they can do, you know, with the operating procedure that takes relatively short amount of time that can really drive a lot of sustainability gains and also cut their costs. So a lot of the work that we do is really thinking through those things. And in terms of the kinds of careers, a lot of that looks like how do you actually do stakeholder management? How do you talk to people in the industry? How do you figure out what they actually want and need? A lot of it is the data analysis part of it. How do you look at spreadsheets of procurement data, like, you know, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of food, and how do you look at those and figure out where there's major bottlenecks and major opportunities? And then, you know, being a newer nonprofit, like you were saying, there's a lot of general roles that it takes to start something. You need people who are fundraising. You need people who are doing the media work and amplifying the message of your organization. So a lot of that work is ongoing, for us at least, and there's many opportunities we have. This summer we're opening up a lot of internship opportunities, and then we'll also be having some full-time job opportunities opening up later this year. So if anybody is interested in doing some of that food consulting work, or just, you know, more visibility to the veil behind of the food system, yeah, feel free to talk to me about that. But yeah, we're basically a short synopsis of what we do, and really trying to figure out like how we can plug ourselves in, especially being a Gen Z-led organization, and trying to help kind of quantify, but also characterize like what consumers in our generation are also looking for. So, you know, consumer insights is a really important aspect of what we do too, and a lot of that work is doing a lot of data collection, surveying populations that we're serving, and trying to understand like what things they care about and what things they are looking for in the food that they're served. So a lot of that work is very new, but it's exciting work to be able to engage with people who are really feeling the impacts of the food that they're being served. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it because I feel like a lot of us, we talk about the manufacturers, but like the distributors, as you were mentioning, is something where it's like, yeah, there's even careers in that. And yeah, perhaps it's not working at these like giant brands like Unilever, like Kellogg's, or, you know, all these other food brands. It's like, what about the distributors and the other industries that are existent on that? So thank you so much for sharing that. Emmy, for my next question with you is like, you talked a lot about, you know, your journey with Earth Guardians and how it's really helped develop you when you were in your youth during that era, and now you're raising the next generation of land steward youth. So I wanted to ask you at Earth Guardians, how you're really building new pathways for youth leadership programs or fellowships or internships. And I know that recently that you may have gotten a grant to work something around land and food.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So at Earth Guardians, we see ourselves as a bridge for young change makers to have careers and thriving lives within the green space, right? And I sometimes I have a hard time talking about this because I feel like all of us in this room, like climate stewardship is everything. It is embedded in everything. It's not like this separate conversation that we're having, outside of all the other things that we're dealing with as humans. So we see ourselves as a bridge for young people, and we're this year we're having partnerships where we can intentionally connect young people to careers in the green spaces. And to your point about our grant, we did get a grant from the EPA this last year. Got it distributed to us this year because it's been locked up in court cases. But the EPA grant was for us to have our Indigenous Youth Initiative, another flagship program at Earth Guardians. Our Indigenous Youth Initiative is really the groundwork of Earth Guardians. It's how we got our start. Our founder and her son started this program, and it is the heartbeat of our work, and they teach us our traditional ecological knowledge that we pass on to our crews, who then lead it in their localities. And so our training will bring together a cohort of 20 Indigenous youth across different tribes, and they will be learning how to traditional eco knowledge to take back to their communities and be able to do land stewardship projects. So at Earth Guardians, our model is it's not just volunteering, it is participation and contributing to your community where you are. We're teaching you how to belong to the environment, to see yourself as a child of the earth. And once you have realized and remembered, right? Like remembered, not even realized, but remembered that we are children of the earth. From there, we give you access to the traditional ecological knowledge to be able to then steward your land, as well as then contribute and have shared responsibility and be exemplary leaders for your community. So with intentional partnerships like Green Jobs Board as well, we'll be able to really connect our young folks into thriving careers, like I have with Earth Guardians myself. So what I really appreciate with the panelists here and what you guys have really been mentioning is the multifaceted that you have to have in this space, right? Like, it's not that we're just land stewards, we're also tech stewards. I spend a lot of my time doing Excel sheets and doing things that aren't sexy work. It's very, the opposite of sexy work. And it's that non-sexy work that got me in the position that I'm in today. Like, I would not be the executive director if I didn't have competency in Excel, in Google management workspace, and all these things. So for me, it's really important that we're remembering that we want to have joy and have fun in this aspect. And there's some things that we have to build like willpower to do, to remind ourselves that it starts internally. And then from there, we're able to expand. So I'm like kind of touching on some of the advice that I would maybe like leave off, but let me remind myself of your question.
Yes. Wait, let me actually.
Thank you, love. Yeah, so how is our work helping shape the next generation, next gen? So as a 26-year-old, I consider myself next gen, and I felt like an important message to bring to this space. So I'm glad I took a pause, because an important message that I want to give to you guys is remembering that there are pathways that have been created for us already. So a lot of my eagerness and excitement for being an Earth Guardian, for starting my journey, which I shared at the beginning, came from learning about how there are so many challenges that there are to solve, right? It's like it can be overwhelming, but at the same time very exciting to see how we can find our unique role in this movement. And there are so many paths that have been laid out in front of us already. So we've talked about mentorship. I want to bring in our Indigenous brothers and sisters into this space, and remembering to connect with those communities to see what has come before us, so that way we're not just reinventing the wheel, but really expanding on the work that has been done. So we are building at Earth Guardians opportunity for the next gen, but we're intergenerational. We call our folks over 30 our seasoned youth. We work intergenerationally because it is so important to honor that seasoned youth. Our seasoned youth work because like that linear path is just going to get more straight. So everybody in this audience, I just want you guys to remember that you guys are creating history. Chrissy said that at the beginning. You guys are history makers. So the more that we help make that path linear, the better it will be for the next generation coming up. So
I love that. As a seasoned youth myself, and Chrissy over here too, seasoned youth, I think it's really about understanding like these systems have always existed before, especially Indigenous communities who have always and continue to show us the food systems that are sustainable and have resisted against these large systems that we're up against. The last question, which is the closeout before our panel ends, is if we can keep it to one sentence of like, what would be the best advice you'd give to people trying to enter the food, land, agriculture space industry?
I'll kick us off. One advice entering the food and agriculture industry, I would say to start internal, start in your own backyard. Get your hands in some dirt by potting a container of veggies in your backyard, a tree, anything that you can do, whether that's inside your house. Start small, because that's building up the vessel to this has been talked about in different spaces, but it builds up the vessel to remind yourself to trust yourself, to show yourself that you can do it, and to give yourself some agency, so that way you realize that all the power and everything that you need is internal. So when life is overwhelming, I would say just remember to take a pause, do some grounding work like we've been doing here today. Every time I feel like I need to do something, because I'm the queen of overwhelm and overwork, every time I feel like I need to do something, I've been trying to integrate in my practice to stop, pause, and remind myself that I don't need to do anything. I want to do it, or I get to do it. And that mindset, especially for those unsexy things that we have to do, it becomes, when you say, oh, I get to do this, that's a huge, huge shift in your mindset. That really helps you to continue in this work. So just find your why, build up your vessel, be patient with yourself, be graceful, and remember that we are divine.
I love that. I'll do two things, but I'll keep them very brief. One of them is something that I think has already been mentioned, but I just want to reiterate how important it was for me, which is building a network of mentors and supporters. It's especially if you're running your own organization, you know how important that is. But also just in general, the way that I really got into the space and what really solidified that I wanted to continue going to the space was actually attending a conference back in 2023. And I came to this issue from an animal advocacy standpoint. So it was the Animal and Vegan Advocacy Conference. And in that space is where I found a community of people who were equally passionate about something as I was, and I was like, these are my lifelong friends, and I that empowers me every day, and the spaces I've been able to continue to grow into, just being involved with a lot of these different initiatives has been really empowering and has kept me thriving and growing. So I think that's super important. And I think that the second thing I'd say is more from somebody who is, just getting started with things and kind of figuring themselves out too. I think it's important to ask questions and to also accept that you don't know things, because I think we have a tendency to, especially when we're talking to people who are in positions of authority or who are, much older than us, we have a tendency to, shy away from feeling like we don't know things or that we aren't really put together. But I think honestly being very open about that and curious when I don't know things has actually been really helpful in deepening relationships with people and building trust in ways that being a standard sort of trained way of speaking doesn't always do. So yeah.
All right. So I'm sorry, could you remind me of the question?
Yeah, just in one sentence, if you can, what's the best advice you would give to people trying to enter the food, agriculture, land-based work?
Thank you. Explore. I would say take every opportunity that is handed to you. The path might not seem linear where I started my career and where I look back. Like, I don't think I would have ended up in the food recovery space doing community outreach, but it all makes sense in hindsight of just like different roles that I've had and how those have contributed to me being the right candidate for this job and then having enough fulfillment in this work to stick with it. So environmental conservation work is incredibly intersectional. Play around in the pockets that you find the most interest in. If that's food and ag, learn more about the systems that make that work and what doesn't work in it. I echo what a lot of you say of like, don't reinvent the wheel. Explore, ask questions, see what work is already being done and how you can contribute to it. I think I definitely I've always been in Southern California, but I've lived in LA for 5 years, and there's so many spaces and orgs, and a great joy of my job as agency relations manager is learning about all the wonderful organizations doing incredible work day in and day out, not only in LA, but throughout Southern California. But there's just so many fantastic orgs and so many fantastic missions that kind of are succeeding in the different intersects of what the work is that you're trying to get done. So I say play around, explore. If you want to get into food and ag, you can go directly into it, but also indirect paths work too. So that's it for me, but thank you so much.
I'll say this as someone who self-identifies as an enthusiastic biodesigner. Take nature's lead. There is no such thing as waste in nature. And nature loves to create a diversity of new life, new forms of being. It's a strong contrast to these industrial systems that we have today, where the systems are trying to force us all to make like singular, frankly, boring choices. So I encourage you all to follow that kind of creativity rooted in nature and allow yourself to follow your curiosity in the process. So that would be my parting line.
Thank you so much for each and every one of you. Please give them a round of applause. They'll be at the back if you want to connect with them, job opportunities, everything. But we're going to actually transition into a break, and then we're going to take a quick photo. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, y'all.
Advice across the board.